Hi, welcome back everyone. This is part 2, and we're going to actually take a look at how to do Punnett squares and calculate probabilities. So in the last video, we introduced all of the terminology for genetics, and we talked about the homozygous and heterozygous genotypes, and we also introduced the idea of phenotypes. So remember, a genotype is the allele combination that an organism has for a particular gene. You can be homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, or heterozygous. Those are the three possible genotypes. Genotypes determine phenotypes, and a phenotype is the physical characteristic of an organism. So freckles, no freckles, black fur, white fur, tall, short, purple, white, those are all phenotypes. But phenotypes are a direct result of the allele combinations. They are a direct result of the phenotypes. So now we're going to take a look at how we can actually put these genotypes into a model, such as a Punnett square, and predict the probability of what traits and what genotypes we might see in the offspring. So a Punnett square is just that. It's a tool for predicting what the offspring are going to look like. It is not an absolute guarantee that that is what you are going to see in your offspring. It's a possibility of what you might see in your offspring. So we're going to take an example here of mice and fur color, and we'll look at black fur being dominant to white fur. Well, how do I know that black fur is the dominant color? Well, I take a look at my nomenclature here. Black fur was assigned a capital letter B, and I know from the previous video that I assign uppercase letters to dominant traits. So black fur, capital B, dominant trait over white fur, lowercase b, in mice. So the problem is asking me to cross a heterozygous male with a homozygous recessive female. Now, right away, when I see heterozygous, I think, and I'm going to use a letter B, the letter B here, one of each, okay? Heterozygous means having one of each. So right here, capital B, lowercase b, that would be a heterozygous male in this case. Homozygous recessive, again, homozygous meaning two of the same, recessive meaning two recessive alleles or two lowercase letters. That would be my homozygous recessive female. Now, what does that look like on their chromosomes? Here's the homologous pairs of chromosomes. That means that my heterozygous male on his homologous chromosomes has a black allele and a white allele. The female, on the other hand, because she's homozygous recessive, has two white fur alleles. So we're going to take a look between these allele combinations that these parents have to pass on to their offspring. What are the possibilities that the offspring are going to end up with black fur versus white fur? So here's our male. Again, our male is capital B, lowercase b. And the female is lowercase b, heterozygous and homozygous recessive. Now, the first thing that I need to do is here's my Punnett square. It's a mono hybrid cross because we are only looking at one trait, so mono for one. The first thing that I want to do is I want to put the two allele possibilities. And remember right here, these are the two alleles, right? A dominant allele and a recessive allele that my father can pass on to his children. And the female can pass on either of the two recessive alleles that she has. So I'm going to separate, and this goes back to that independent assortment idea. I'm going to separate the two alleles next to my Punnett square as so. And I'm going to do the same thing for my female. Raise this up a little bit. Now, in this example, the male gametes are written on the left and the female gametes are written across the top. You could reverse that I could put the two male gametes on the top, and I could put the two female gametes down on the side. That wouldn't matter. What does matter is that I keep the male gametes on the same, together on the same side. That I didn't write a capital B here and then his lowercase b up here. I need to keep them on the same side as each other. So inside my boxes are all of the possible zygote combinations if mom and dad, if this allele and this allele get together at fertilization. So in that case, this is what my combination would look like, right? Capital B, the dominant gene is always written first. So I bring my dominant gene over and my recessive gene from mom down to make a heterozygous combination. Over here, same thing. The capital B from dad comes across. The lowercase b from mom comes down. In this box, the lowercase b from dad comes across. The lowercase b from mom comes down. And same here. Lowercase b from dad comes across, and mom's allele comes down. What I end up with are some ratios. And we can see those in these boxes down here. We create something that is called a genotypic ratio. Well, before we get into the ratios, let me talk a little bit about these boxes. We're going to go work with the assumption that the entire Punnett square is equivalent to 100%. All four boxes equal 100%. That means each box by itself is 25%. So when I want to write a genotypic ratio, take a look over here on the right-hand side. What I'm really asking myself is, what is my ratio? Oh, that didn't work, sorry. What is my ratio of homozygous dominant to heterozygous to homozygous recessive? So I'm going to come up and look in my offspring boxes and say, okay, how many homozygous dominant offspring do I have? Well, I have 0. There are no combinations of offspring that are homozygous dominant. How many heterozygous offspring do I have? Well, I have 2, right? Right here. 1. Oh, good grief. And 2. These 2 boxes here, which don't want to highlight for me. And then homozygous recessive, I also have 2. These 2 lower boxes. Maybe if I draw. So let me go back. Here are my 2 heterozygous. And then here are my 2 homozygous recessive. So in my genotypic ratio, that's how I got the 2-to-2 ratio. 50% of my offspring are capital B, lowercase b, 50% are heterozygous, and 50% are homozygous recessive. My second ratio to figure out is phenotypic ratio. And phenotypic ratio is asking how many of the offspring show the dominant phenotype to the recessive phenotype. Well, in this case, the 2 organisms that are heterozygous, they will show the dominant phenotype of having black fur. And the 2 that are homozygous recessive will show the recessive phenotype of having white fur. Let's take a look at another example using the mice as well. This one says cross 2 hybrid mice. Okay. Well, hybrid is another word for heterozygous. So 2 hybrid mice would be capital B, lowercase b times capital B, lowercase b. Those are 2 heterozygous mice, or 2 hybrid mice. Both of these mice have black fur because they each have 1 copy of that dominant allele. So Again, this is parent number 1, and this is parent number 2. And I'm going to take parent number 1 and write their alleles over here on the side of my Punnett square. So there's parent number 1. And I'll try and circle this. This is parent number 1, and here are the alleles of parent number 1. Parent number 2 is also going to provide very similar alleles. And here are the alleles that parent number 2 can provide. So again, what we're going to produce on the inside are the possible combinations that we could see in our offspring. So in box number 1 here, I'm going to see capital B, because that is what each parent is able to provide to this particular offspring. Over here, capital B, lowercase b. Capital B from parent 1, lowercase b from parent 2. In this box, capital B, lowercase b as well. Capital B from parent 2, lowercase b from parent 1. And here, 2 lowercase b's, where each parent is providing a recessive allele. Now, how do we figure out our ratios? All right, so our genotypic ratio is asking how many of the offspring are homozygous dominant. Well, if we take a look here, there's one right here. One offspring that's homozygous dominant right there. How many of the offspring are heterozygous? 1, 2. So I'll put a 2 here in my ratio. And the last one is how many of the offspring are homozygous recessive? 1. So my genotypic ratio in this case is 1, 2, 1. 1, or 25% homozygous dominant, 2 that are heterozygous, or 50%, and 1, or 25% homozygous recessive. Now, phenotypic ratio. Again, phenotypic ratio is asking what percentage of my offspring are going to show the dominant trait of having black fur versus the recessive trait of having white fur. Well, in this case, let's see, I'll use black here. In this case, all of the offspring that have at least one copy of the dominant gene, which is these 3 right here, the homozygous dominant and the 2 heterozygous individuals, are going to have black fur. So I'll write a 3 here. This last guy down here in the corner, he's homozygous recessive, so he's going to express the recessive phenotype of having white fur. So I'm going to draw a 1 here. So my phenotypic ratio in this case is 3 to 1.